Hello, hello. My name is April Malone. Yes, I work from home, and this is the podcast. Today, I have Kelly McGinley from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, with us, and she is a productivity expert, but she also comes from education and has worked with lots of nonprofits. She's really good at helping people manage their meetings and time. So, Kelly, why don't you go ahead and come in and tell us a little bit about your history and where you're at now?
Thank you so much, April. I appreciate the warm welcome. My name is Kelly McGinley, and I started Function and Flow about 2 years ago. It's a people and project management consultancy based on 20 years and change of project management, 10 years as an educator, and about 15 as a project manager across nonprofit and a tiny little bit of corporate in there too.
Okay, so let's talk about your journey a little bit. How many of those years have you been working from home?
About 6 in total. When I started working from home, it was the last organizational job that I had before I started working for myself. And it started out not from home, but then, as anyone who works in a job that has regional field offices and a headquarters knows, messages get lost in the crossing, and my office disappeared and someone forgot to mention it.
What? What?
So
Okay, wait a minute. Okay, can you tell that whole story now?
Yeah, it's a true story. I had a great little office. We rented out space. It was a field. It used to be the headquarter office, but then slowly over time, the headquarters shifted to a different city. It became less and less and less. And I was the last person standing. And I came in one day to pick up some things, and found out that we had not renewed the lease.
Oh,
And there were a
wow.
lot of shocked faces when they realized they had forgotten to tell the one person who actually worked there. Yeah, so then I pretty much shifted to more like a 50-50 work from home, and my position was largely field-based. So a lot of it was working from home in my home office, and then 50% out in the field. And then when the pandemic hit, it was 100% from home, as it was with almost everyone.
That's a fantastic work from home story. Okay, so I have questions though. You had office equipment and
Did. Thank goodness. One of my superpowers is organization, because I had to downsize a 4 office and a huge storage room facility in about a month.
okay.
Make sure that all the education materials got to different field offices, made sure that everything else, I mean, we had floor to ceiling bookshelves, and getting those things donated to the right places so that you're not just a conservation organization that's filling a landfill.
All right.
There's so many things to juggle, but yeah, it was about a month of winding that down and then turning that into my home office space.
Well, at least they gave you that 1 month notice before they threw you out in your ear or threw all your stuff away while you're out.
That there was some generosity there.
Oh my goodness. Uh okay. So did you already have a home office at that time that you were working out of a little bit?
A little bit of one. I had a much more built out one years earlier, when I was doing a lot more volunteer nonprofit work,
Mhm.
but had sort of downsized that. And then, so the space was really, really fortunate to have a space that could be designated just for a home office. And there were some fits and starts when I started working from home full time, because there were a lot of tech things that needed to happen almost instantaneously,
Mhm.
that got exponentially more complicated when the pandemic hit, and then also trying to teach and replicate these skills for a lot of different volunteer groups that I worked with as part of my job, who were trying to shift their model from completely in person to completely remote, and being just in the dark as to how to do all of that.
Right. So you were already working out of a home office at that time, but you needed to help all these people learn how to do that real quick.
Yeah,
Can
yeah.
you talk about the tech things that got more complicated as time went on? Can you just go back and break that down a little bit?
I have a great story about the day I trapped my husband in one end of the house for several hours and forgot.
What happened?
It was very early. we had an Ethernet connection. So I live in the kind of a little house in the woods. And so internet connection is not always great when it's Wi-Fi or when it's cell-based, but Wi-Fi is solid. So I had an Ethernet connection in my kitchen, but I had to do 2 or 3 back-to-back meetings plus a public presentation. And they were just flowing back to back to back to back to back. And I didn't realize that my camera was blocking the only passageway through the house. And so he was stuck at one end of the house, just,
Waiting
hours
patiently.
later. He had the bathroom, but not the kitchen.
So he knew that you were on camera and he didn't want to like bust into your meetings.
Exactly.
Well, that was really thoughtful of him. There have been people that have been busted into. I don't think it's really ever been a problem with the podcast, but teaching. I used to teach online to students primarily in China, actually. And a lot of times, like the parents knew that their kid was on camera and they knew that, the camera was pointing into the room, but they would try to army crawl, like to try to be outside of the view of the camera, but we could still see them because they didn't really know. Yeah. I mean, and some people would literally like run through the room. Like in the summer, they didn't always have air conditioning, if you know what I mean. So definitely saw a lot of people that weren't as cognizant of as your husband was.
He was a very good sport, although we did run a different Ethernet connection to my office the very next day.
Yep.
And that's been a godsend. Like I've had the same setup. I think I moved it across to the other side of the room one time. But other than that, you refine it over time, but you get a couple of things that just work and they're reliable and they're solid. And I just prefer not to mess with it. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been working out of this office. Oh my goodness. Let me think about how many years that has been. I don't know. Almost 5, maybe. Yeah. And it's a closet, which is nice because no one else really needs to come in here. And so it's pretty much my space. I mean, like there's some fun things that the kids like to come in and grab. And it has to kind of turn into a little bit of a storage area as well. So sometimes in order to record, I have to like move a few things out of the way, out of the view. But yeah, it's nice when you can finally find a, dedicated place and not have to move it. You said you live in the woods a little bit. Are you using satellite internet or do you have access to DSL or something else?
We are very lucky to have cable internet. So it's pretty reliable when you're hooked in that way. Yeah.
I remember we were looking before we moved to Arizona, my husband applied for a job in Kansas City, and the house that I wanted to rent, I loved it. It was so cute. It was on the other side of a river and there was literally no way they could dig a cable. Like they wouldn't. Like if I maybe paid $7,000 for them to do something, they could have, but it can really restrict. And my company that I worked for at the time wouldn't allow me to use satellite internet. And they basically required me to have a fast enough connection. So I wouldn't have been able to live in the house. So that's cool that even though you're out a bit, you've got cable.
Yeah, it was a long, arduous road to get it. But
really?
Once we've lived here for a little over 20 years now. So once we got it sorted out, it's been really good.
They didn't make you pay $7,000 to dig it, did they?
They did not. We have a bunch of neighbors in our little patch of the woods. So it was,
So they finally came out to you.
It did. They did.
That's good. And I have heard about little communities like that splitting that cost. So sometimes, but yeah. Okay. So let's go back to your education years and then talk about your path into nonprofit. And then how did you, well, obviously you got thrown into working from home, but I just want to hear a little bit about where you were before you came to now.
Sure. So my degree is in music education, which is completely unrelated to anything I do now.
I have a degree in education and music, but not music education. I got out of that.
Yeah. I mean, I had fully intended to be a performer and then, a couple of small injuries that get worse over time and you just gotta accept reality and move on. Turns out I loved teaching, and I taught elementary school music for about 10 years, did some curriculum development in that time, ran my own business. and then shifted from there to working for a fair trade company, doing marketing and doing volunteer management, which I also loved. And then at the same time, started a prison dog program,
A prison what program?
prison dog program,
Oh,
which sort of came out of nowhere. It was sort of a side conversation that I'd had with a friend of mine. We were both volunteering together. She was running the organization and I was just helping out. And it started to take on a life of its own. And it became one of the best projects I've ever worked on. I ran it for about 10 years in a maximum security prison. We adopted out over 150 dogs while I was there. And just a phenomenal experience, a really great crash course in leadership. And
and
then it's still running today, which is great.
can you just tell me, like, in what capacity does the prison dog program work? Like,
Oh
it
yeah.
kind of sounds like an archaic thing, like guard dogs, or like for
No.
therapy, or like, what is this?
So it didn't really fit the mold of other programs, which was why we thought it was just the coolest thing. So we worked with a collective of different rescues from across central Pennsylvania. And what we heard over and over again was that they would often have a dog or two in each different rescue that was they just couldn't figure out a way to train them. They didn't have well, unlikely to have had any paid staff or funds to pay a trainer. Volunteers can get you so far, but that's a big ask of volunteers to work with a dog that is, has some pretty severe either behavioral, emotional, wellness issues, all sorts of things. So we thought, what if we could train the inmates to train the dogs? And they would
Wow.
have them living in the cell with them. That's always a surprise to folks.
Oh, wow.
It turned out to be such an amazing program. So it's called the Hope Dogs, and we would have 8 dogs in the prison at a time. The inmates had to apply for the positions. They had to have really specific and very strict requirements to get into it. But once they were in, they could stay as long as they wanted, as long as they kept up with the program and also kept their record clean.
Oh my
So
goodness. That is such a cool program I've never heard of.
it was. So we took dogs that had pretty massive behavioral issues, either from abuse or from neglect. Occasionally, we took what I call average dog, which is a dog who will just sit in rescue for sometimes years because they're just like 2 to 5 years old, average height, average weight, average build, average breed.
Oh.
And because of that, they won't go anywhere. But if they're
Mhm.
in the prison program and you have a weekly journal written for you by an inmate that gets posted on the internet, it turns out to be a pretty big selling point.
Wow. Well, and what a cool way to develop a trade, basically, for these inmates to learn the skills of training the dogs, right?
It was wonderful. I mean, not a single one went on to be a dog trainer, which I wouldn't have expected them to, but my
Okay.
favorite thing of all time, with the exception of seeing the families come back to the reunion, was giving job recommendations to inmates that had paroled
Mm.
or had maxed out their sentence and were re-entering society. And I would
Hmm.
get a call to give a reference for one of them for a job. And it's a really cool feeling to know that you were a piece of that and that they have taken that and just run with it.
Well, and it would be therapeutic too to have something or someone to care for and to develop a relationship with. So that's an amazing program. Are they still doing it?
They are. Yep. I ran it for about 10 years and then transitioned out of leadership. And it's still to this day. It shut down for obvious reasons during the pandemic, but it's back up and running now and still working with dogs.
Now, is that a standalone program or has that spread to any other institutions?
Yeah, there are plenty all over the country. I mean, we got so much help when we were starting from other organizations across the country who had built different but similar
Hmm.
programs and were so willing to share their lessons learned and helping you avoid the pitfalls that you really don't need to repeat. Nobody needs to reinvent those particular wheels.
Right.
Yeah, so we got tons of help, and we actually had the good fortune to be invited down to a couple of prisons in Maryland to replicate the program, which was
Oh, nice.
another really good opportunity.
And so it just helps these dogs move through the system and have a better likelihood of being homed.
It does, and there's a fair amount of evidence and statistics to show the recidivism rate of inmates participating in the program just is exponentially lower. I mean,
Okay.
it's you can see it in the stats that get published, like just the impact that it has both on behavior on the cell block itself and on their ability to transition successfully back into society, which is just, it's a win-win-win all the way around.
Were any of the dogs able to go with their owner, the person that was helping them in the jail?
Yeah, I had to step way back from those applications because there's no way you could be unbiased in that
Yeah.
situation.
Oh, yeah.
But we would give the heads up to a rescue that the family of the inmate is potentially going to put in an application.
Nice.
No special treatment, but if you feel like it's the right home and you feel like it's a good fit, that's what's happening here. And so
Aw.
at least 2 that I can remember off the top of my head did go home with their inmate families and ended up coming to some of the reunions, which was just, it's such it's just such a treat.
So how did you fall into this?
Backward.
And this
Oh,
was before
gosh.
your work from home days, but it is a cool story.
It was, but it was my first home office.
Oh,
'Cause there
was okay.
so much work that was involved in that program. And I mean, I walked onto the cell block one night and one of the officers was standing there with one of the inmates and they were like, settle a bet for us. And the question was, are you a volunteer or paid staff? And I looked at them like, how do you not know the answer to this? I'm a volunteer. And they just dumbstruck. Evidently, 2 people on the block thought that all of us were paid staff and the rest, thought that we were volunteer and the rest thought we were fully paid staff. And it was
No.
quite a realization. But that was my first home office at night because there was just so much work to do outside of that.
How many hours a week were you dedicating to that project?
It was close to a full-time job.
Okay.
But
So
it was
it
a fun one.
should have been full-time pay, but well, so you've been in the nonprofit world since that time?
I have. So I moved from working for a fair trade company to working for a national conservation organization with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. And then from there, I have a little bit of a foray into working for a public speaker, and then back to conservation again.
Okay. And then you branched off into your own. Do you still have your hands in any of these former projects or have you moved on?
You know, I'm really lucky that I get to work with some phenomenal colleagues that I met and developed relationships with in my time at both conservation organizations, and really fortunate that my path crosses with them pretty frequently now with the work that I do now, helping to build out strategies for communications, for volunteer management, running workshops to help get a project from the idea phase into the implementation phase. So moving it along much quicker through a workshop format than could be done through, meeting after meeting after meeting.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about meetings. Sounds like you're kind of a meeting expert. Is that right?
I could nerd out on meetings all day.
Go ahead. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes.
So I have a theory that, born of probably 1,000 bad meetings, that if you can fix meetings, you can put probably close to 2 to 3 usable hours back in your work week every single week. Mm-hmm. I'm a firm believer that meetings are not the problem. They are super useful and a really great and reliable way to do collaboration. I have a problem with the too frequent, too ineffective, and just completely unnecessary ones, which tend to block up our schedules almost like a heavy blanket that's just stitched really tightly together and tends to suffocate the life out of everything else, leaving you with no time or very little time, or only time outside of the workday to get the actual work of your job done.
Okay.
Sound familiar?
Keep going. I've not been in regular meetings much in the last few years, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. So my last job had, this was this case with a lot of different organizations at the time. There were some pretty heavy layoffs. They did their best to take care of folks, but our office got hit pretty hard. Lost about 20% of our workforce, which was very small. It's small to begin with, and yeah, that's big. my job was already sitting at about 1.5 people
Mm-hmm.
and quickly bumped up to close to 2.5 people. I actually showed it to my fourth boss in 4 years on a pie chart, and I needed 2.5 pies. That was the best way I could explain to her the overwhelm that was happening here, because we had let go of these people, and when we had replaced certain positions, they weren't the workload that was sort of split up among people during this period was not, it never, the relief never came. So you want to be, the team player and the pinch hitter that steps up and is like, this is a terrible time. It's not the time to complain. We're all going to band together. We're going to do this. But, 1, 2, 2.5 years later,
Yeah.
and you're still dealing with the same thing. And it's not from being a wallflower about it.
Mm-hmm.
Then
It's
you
not
really
sustainable.
It's not. And it was just, back to back to back to back meetings that oftentimes weren't necessary. And I think this is a byproduct of the pandemic, where with the switch to remote that happened so quickly for a lot of companies and a lot of organizations, the uncertainty of all of that is what resulted in all of these meetings. So you have a question, it exposed a lot of communication gaps and a lot of workflow gaps that were often, I would imagine, handled, with a walk by.
Yeah.
Which now all of a sudden became a default 30-minute meeting because your calendar sets it at 30. So I guess it must need to be 30 instead of 5 or
and then
10.
we better talk for 30.
Right.
So do you have like a solution for like replacing the curbside thing that used to happen regularly that got replaced with a 30-minute meeting?
Don't have one so much for that. I like to say it's just a phone call here and there. I think email has its place, messaging has its place, but there comes a point where it's just becoming more of a time suck than the results that it's producing. It's not worth the trade-off. And in my mind, it's just all about trade-offs. What are you willing to trade in order for the progress that it's going to yield? And so when it comes to, the drive-by, the cubicle drive-by, I don't know that can't be resolved in a direct message or a quick phone call. I love the idea of just reaching out to people from time to time and reconnecting on that human level. But I also think that you can solve a lot of that just by running better meetings altogether. And I think a lot of that happens in what I call the meeting bookends. So the preparation and the progress. You have to have both of those in place. Otherwise, the meat of the meeting, says the vegetarian, the meat of the meeting doesn't quite hold. And it ends up just being an exercise in repetition instead of a stepping stone from milestone to milestone to milestone.
So do you have a beginning meeting and an ending meeting, and then you work in the middle?
I love the tight opening and then setting aside, and this comes as such a shock to most people, but 15% of whatever your total meeting time is to talk through the next steps. It's the part of the meeting that gets left off. If we have time, we'll get to that. No, it's the most critical part because it's what happens next. It's how you avoid repeating the same meeting next week or next month that you just had. So when you, as the meeting planner, put together, so I have what's called mine is called the Take 10 agenda. It's 10 minutes. You can put together a really quick agenda that is going to make your meeting functional. So the first step is to figure out the purpose. And there's usually 3 that are going to cover absolutely everything. It's either inform and update. It's a lot of talking, just letting people know what's going on. There's discuss and decide, which is when you actually need to figure out what's going to happen next, why it's going to happen, who's going to do it, all of these, the next step things. And then there's the approve and move. That's often requires somebody else in the room, possibly that's not normally in there, the person who can give the green light to get things either moving again or to shift it out of one team's purview and into another because the purpose of the work has changed. So you've got your purpose, and then that leads right into your items for the agenda, the attendees. Oh, the ballooning of attendees. is often a lot of the companies that I work with, there's almost a defensiveness about not being included on a meeting invite.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
instead of this, of valuing the space and the time itself and only having the people in that space that are relevant to the items, who have an interest, have influence, or are really impactful to that specific bit of work, it balloons out into just tons and tons of people, and it actually makes the meeting less effective. Whereas you could do a discuss and decide with a tight group of people and then an inform and update after that, that's much more useful.
Okay.
Then you got your prep and homework. This is the part that I think often gets overlooked too. When there's something that needs to be read or filled out, or some action that needs to be taken before a meeting, you kind of give people A, the assignment, and B, the time frame that it's due. I just sent something out this morning to a group that I'm working with. It's asynchronous work. They can do it whenever they want to, as long as it's before the end of the day on Friday.
Okay.
They can log into the platform whenever they want. They can view everything that they need. But come Friday, when we have to discuss this as a group, I need for this to be sorted so that we can move forward with the next steps and stay on track. Meeting math, I'll see on Friday, but usually it does. When you can provide some clear expectation to folks about what you need and when you need it by, most people will do their best to fit inside those parameters. Nobody wants to be the holdup. I used to work with a fellow who's like, as much as possible, I try not to be the holdup. That's my motto in life, in work. I just try not to be the holdup. And it's not always possible. It's not a perfect world, but if you can avoid being the holdup, it's really helpful to other people.
That's fair. I am just remembering, I had a deadline a few weeks ago, something that the person that I needed to work with wasn't available. And so I had to switch who I was going to work on it with. And so that delayed me by a day or two. And so I need to make it up to my boss that next time is kind of like, when you run what do you say? A red light accidentally, and you're like, oops, I'll stop twice next time. And I'm going to be like, well, I better get that next one in early.
But that's just part of doing business too. I call that the dependency debacle. When you have to rely on someone, and this is my office assistant who has a 100% attendance rate.
Oh, hey, puppy. What's this one's name?
This is Henry. And
Hey.
Ever since I started working from home years ago, every time he hears me start talking to the computer, he's always just in to say hello and then back to his nap.
All right. It's a good kind of partner to have.
Yeah. I mean, the dependency, I just wrote about this yesterday. The dependency debacle, you need to be able to rely on people. And sometimes that's going to go beautifully, and sometimes there's going to be hiccups in it. And I often use what I call the elephant email, which is, I haven't forgotten about you, but I can't get to this by whatever date I told you I was going to get to it by. That said, it's first on my list for this day. You will have it by this time.
Okay.
And that way, the person's not just waiting indefinitely for you. Like, I mean, I know when I'm the one waiting, I'm like, what did I do? In my head, it's catastrophic. Like I've offended someone, I've dropped the ball in some way, and it's almost never that. Like I say all the time, no one's universe revolves around me, but I have to remind myself all the time, like, you're not the center of their world. 20 other things went wrong, and that's why they haven't responded.
That sounds about right. What kind of feedback have you gotten from this meeting style?
I think there's always a little hesitation with, do I need an agenda for everything? And I would say almost always yes. There's an occasional one you might not need it for, but the agenda isn't just for you, it's for everybody in attendance too. It tells them what's happening, how long it's going to take, how relevant it is to them. And you doing that actually provides them some autonomy to say, I can come for the first half and I see that's where you need me most, but I got to duck out for the second half. I'm underwater with 7 other things. Or I'm not needed for this. Is it okay if I sit this one out?
Hmm.
Or I saw this agenda pop out. I think I could be really useful. Can I jump in? You know, there's a
Okay.
lot of freedom that you can give to other people just with a little bit of transparency. And also, it keeps you honest. Like when you say, a meeting math is a huge thing for me. And we are an overly optimistic people when it comes to meeting math. Like, surely we can solve this complex, entrenched problem that our organization has had for 35 years in 20 minutes or so at the end of a 17-item agenda. Like, of course, that's not going to happen. Most of the time, it's 2 or 3 things at most that you can get done reasonably, and then still have that 15% left at the end to talk through what you decided and what happens next.
15% is a very precise number. How many minutes is 15%?
It depends on how long your meeting is.
It's like math. So I attend a meeting regularly. It's only like once a month, maybe twice a month. But we get the agenda about 1 or 2 minutes before the meeting starts. So when would you recommend sending out an agenda?
I think it depends a little bit on what your agenda is about. If you've got homework for people, things they have to do, read, make time to pay attention to, I think you got to give them at least a week, no less. It's just common decency to let people have some time to figure out how that fits into their week. Again, not the center of anyone else's universe. For meetings that are pretty routine and regular and you know they're happening every week, I think maybe a couple days might be okay. It gives people time to see it, make a decision as to whether they might have an argument for coming to a shorter part of it or not at all, or including someone else who wasn't involved, who wasn't on the invite list. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. I just think you know the people that you work with. How much time do you need to give them in order for them to have to see the email, to open it, and to process what's in it?
How big of groups are you generally working with? Are you helping like teams transform their productivity or whole corporations transform their productivity?
Typically, it's a team within an organization. So I don't usually work with like huge organizations all at once.
Okay.
I'm much more of a small group. Figure out the problem that keeps surfacing, the lesson that you have to keep learning over and over and over again, and figure out a way for the team to learn it once and for all so that they can move forward from that. So that can be anywhere from a team of maybe 4 or 5 to if it's I work with a group now that has a 2 specific leads, but then a group of about 24 that I work with when I do their workshops. So it varies pretty widely, but definitely the smaller departments and teams within an organization.
And about what kind of time frame are you usually working with these teams to help them transform?
Depends on what they're looking for. So there's a group that I'm working with now that has about a 6-month runway. And the very beginning of that is the planning. So I usually do like a 3-step thing: get centered, get sorted, and get started. The centered part is getting them focused on what do you want to get out of this process? What's the main goal? There can't be 10. Usually it's 1, maybe 2, 3. You might be able to convince me on 3, but usually 2 is plenty. Then you're getting sorted. So do we need a workshop? If we need a workshop, are you relatively confident that all the people that you need to make these decisions are going to be able to come? And then from there, here are the exercises that I would recommend building so that you start moving from brainstorming to discussion to decision in a pretty thoughtful way that doesn't use more time than is necessary, but also doesn't shortchange the discussion itself. It doesn't truncate it in a way that makes people walk away feeling like we didn't really have a good discussion here. We didn't get everybody's voice wasn't heard, because that's kind of the worst way I can think of to move forward, is to say you're going to have a discussion, but then build it in a way that doesn't really allow for that time and space, processing time, the discussion time. And then the get started part, that's always my favorite, because you've got your next steps, your who, what, when. Everybody's clear on expectations. And when you start building out expectations that everybody can see and understand and is aware of, you have instant accountability, which is something that I love. I think accountability gets a bad rap. It's like you're either getting a ribbon or you're getting the principal's office. There's no middle ground, and there's certainly no collaboration in that. Whereas if you can build something that has clear expectations and milestones and who does what and when, you can take a look at what worked, what didn't, and what sort of worked but needs a little help. And it instantly shifts the focus away from blaming one person for not getting their thing done and into this solution mode where the team is like, well, it broke down here and that was caused by this. So here's where we need to put the fix in order to get that moving forward again. And then you've got this shared accountability where people are still responsible to each other, but it removes the sense, the fear of being blamed or shamed for something.
When I'm imagining you having these meetings with people, I keep thinking of you in the room with them, but you're doing most of this virtually, aren't you?
I am, yeah. And there's so many cool tools that you can use nowadays that I love to play with. I nerd out on them a little bit. Miro is my absolute favorite. It's it's a whiteboard at its core.
Different from Jamboard?
Similar. It just has so many cool, fun features. And so you can build these different frames. So I just did a workshop a couple of months ago that had 4 very distinct parts of it. And some of it I wanted participation ahead of time. So those were visible to the group well ahead. They had their homework assignments. They knew when they had to have it done. And they were super good about participating in that way. And then we had some that I specifically did not want them to see. I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to get that first a little bit of adrenaline going in the meeting where they start, you get asked a question, you're like, I'm going to figure this out. And then you can add graphics into it, you can turn videos into it, you can put timers on different activities. We did some voting exercises, which was great because some of the priorities that I think the group thought would rise to the top didn't. They were absolutely parking lotted for later, but it was kind of a shock to a couple of folks in the room that the things that hit the top of the list, the things that they wanted to address immediately, were a little bit of a surprise. And it was just a really interesting conversation. And that's one of my favorite things about running workshops is you come with the plan, but you have no attachment to the outcome as the facilitator. However, the discussion moves and flows and works its way through the process is how it goes. And I feel really lucky to be trusted with that position and to get to work with these folks and help them through this process, because it can be a little unnerving and unmooring to realize in an instant that what you thought everyone agreed on is not the case at all.
Nice. That's good for leaders to know. I want to know a little bit more about Miro. How do you spell that?
Miro. And I'm not an affiliate. I just love it so much.
How is it different from Jamboard?
I have only used Jamboard as a participant, so I don't want to speak to it too much, but Miro, it's just built for people who run collaborative workshops. I mean, it's so intuitive. Everything about it just makes sense. So what I led a project in January that was, well, actually it was a few months of a project, but it was building out a manual for a team to use going forward for a project that everyone had sort of been thrown into the deep end, and they all knew it. They survived it, but they also knew that they never wanted to put anybody else in that position. Okay. So they wanted to build the foundation for somebody else to use, kind of the idea of plant a tree under which you never intend to sit. So you're paying it forward. Okay. And we built out on the same Miro board. So we just used different sections of it. And that's one thing I love is there's no end to the board. So one project, you can just keep building different pieces on. So people only have to have one link bookmarked, which is great. And then they just move around the board depending on what stage of the project you're in. You can go back to earlier stages, which I had to do a million times, which everything was in one spot. So it was super, super easy and a big time saver. So at the top of the board, we built out task cards that sort of turned into a Gantt chart timeline, where you have how long things are going to take in a certain period of time, so that you can see that this part of the project is we expect it to take 1 month to do all of these interviews.
When I
And then
think of task cards, I'm thinking of Trello now.
similar. Yep.
Okay. Keep going.
Yeah, so it's a task card a lot like that. You can put the task itself on it. You can add a lot of detail. You can put attachments, links. There's a status board. I was actually just teaching a group of young leaders how to use it this morning. You change the status so that you don't have to have a ton of meetings in between, because anytime you want to see what's happening, you just check in with the board and you can see that whoever was supposed to be working on this one piece, it's in progress. You don't need to hassle them. And the deadline isn't for 2 more days. If you don't see it click over to done in 2 days, check in. But as long as they're in progress, they're doing their thing and they're doing it in a way that suits them.
Mm-hmm.
And then so we had this beautiful timeline built out that crossed over about 4 months. And then below that, we had, I think it was 150 sticky notes. So we had done, between the 3 of us, about 15 interviews with the people who had been thrown into the deep end to hear straight from them what they thought were the most offensive parts of the process, what they would like to see fixed as soon as possible, and what they felt like, yeah, it was a little bit of a problem, but we all got over it. It's fine.
Okay.
So we all put that into a shared Google sheet. That was fine. And then Miro, you can actually copy the whole Google spreadsheet into Miro. It all appears on separate sticky notes, and then you can move all of those around however you want. So I had,
Wow.
I know, 150 sticky notes that I then moved into what became 7 chapters of a manual. We color coded them. We moved a few after we had a chance to review it for about a week and a half and figure out what was maybe in the wrong chapter or just didn't quite fit. Maybe we needed to add an extra chapter. We moved all of those things and then turned that into the final product. It was just such a good resource for building out this seemingly intractable problem that had a very short timeline to finish it. And it was, I should mention, it was right over the holidays too.
Of course it was.
So, I mean, there just wasn't possible to have a ton of meetings. It would have been cruel to ask people to meet in person that many times. But
Right.
using this, they were all able to do their parts. We built out the chapters separately, did drafts, and everybody was able to link their drafts inside the Miro board. So you never had to wonder where anything was. And if you lost the link, you knew exactly where to go to find it. It was just, I just can't say enough about Miro. It's just so much fun.
So, I mean, I probably could just look this up real quick, but I'll just ask you, is it like, does the enterprise need to have like, so many users, or can one person own the account and then share it with all the other people that are contributing?
Yeah, so they have a great feature called visitors. They have one for guests too, which have to have an account, whether it's free or not.
Yeah.
They have to be able to log in.
Sure.
How I most frequently use it though, and I should say there is a free level if you want to test the water and just dip your toe in. But I have the kind of the lower end, but I own the board, unlimited boards, and then I can set the permission to sharing it so that anybody who has the link has the ability to edit it.
Similar to Google products.
Exactly. And if they're not logged in, we just have a system where they put so when we were doing that 150 Post-it notes, we initialed when we moved things. So if there was a suggestion that you had to move things, you might initial that particular sticky note. For everything else, if you had comments, I was pink, somebody else was blue, and somebody else was green. It had to do with their brand colors.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
So it made it easy to remember what color you are. And anytime we didn't use those colors for anything else. So anytime you saw that pop up, you knew exactly who was talking.
Okay. That sounds really fun. I attend a conference in September, and I don't know if I'll volunteer to be a speaker or not, but they're always, trying for adult education. They're always trying to find, new ways to be, interactive. And I've seen a lot of Jamboard and, similar things. So probably everyone knows about Miro except for me. I don't know.
I don't know how old Miro is, and it was the third one that I tried, and I just have never looked back since I started working with it. It's got everything that you could possibly want.
What other tools
Oh,
do you love? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say one other thing, which is really helpful for when you send people to it. Even if they've used it once or twice, it can be a little daunting, but you can post or pin a notes page to the very front so that anytime somebody clicks on it, they get the instruction page right out of the gate,
Okay,
which reminds them what to do and where to go to find it. Just
that's
makes
good.
life easier.
So what other
Um,
tools do you love?
I am a huge fan of ClickUp, which is a project management app.
Mhm.
I like the way it's laid out. I like the way it includes other team members. I have a few of my projects laid out in that. I love that it weaves right into the Google Calendar, which is my can't live without
That's good to
scheduling.
know. So they integrate well.
I do, like everything pops up exactly when it's due, and I just don't have to worry about forgetting certain pieces. And there's always parts, like I think you have different parts of project management where there's always a section of it. For me, it's scheduling the marketing emails. I hate writing them. I don't know why. It's a block I can't get past. I know how to do it. It's not that hard. I just don't like doing it. So my brain will just forget about those things, but
Mhm.
ClickUp doesn't allow for that. So it
Okay.
reminds me exactly when it's due.
So you're talking about your own brand marketing emails,
Yeah.
function and flow brand. So ClickUp, Miro. Are there any other tools that you've used? Okay, I usually like to ask, have there been any challenges that you personally have had to overcome in your work from home office?
For sure. I think for me, it's knowing what to add and what to subtract depending on what the task is. So I love writing, despite what I just said. When it comes to writing articles or writing, coming up with graphic promotes, just really beautiful pieces, I love doing that stuff. I cannot do it if my phone is anywhere near or
Okay.
if I'm hungry. Like once my stomach starts getting louder than the typing on the keys, we have a
Mm-hmm.
problem.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I like to just go through a very simple process at the beginning of writing because I know it's going to take me a couple hours to do between the actual writing. Um, I usually do the bad words on a page first, just get it out, and then be able to come back and edit it. So my prize is that words on a page come first, and then I get to go back out to the kitchen and get a cup of coffee. If the pot of coffee is sitting right next to me and the mug and my phone, there is no chance in any universe that anything is getting written because there's always a notification that pops up.
Mm-hmm.
There's always like one more thing that you could just do this real quick thing before. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just procrastination.
Mm-hmm.
It's for me, it's twofold. It's the fear of what if I don't have anything to say this time around?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and if you just get into it, it always flows. Whether
Yeah.
it sometimes it flows a little slower, but it always gets there. And the other one is the perfectionist procrastination, which I just learned about
I'm
last year.
queen.
Oh my gosh, this is never going to launch because I'm going to keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking.
Mm-hmm.
So that one's another one because I don't always have a lot of things that I build are for my business and they're for pushing out. So there's no one kind of hovering over my shoulder to say, is that done yet? Is that done yet?
Mm-hmm.
And so I can keep at it indefinitely if I don't put some sort of boundary on it myself.
I feel like that's one of the challenges of being an entrepreneur is that we're willing to show up for other people, but when it's for ourselves, it gets trickier.
Absolutely. I think exercise for me too was a huge one. I think when I first started working from home full time, I would realize, 8, 9 hours in that I hadn't gotten out of my chair all day,
Mm-hmm.
which is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2
Mm-hmm.
dogs. There's no reason for that. So I have actually built that into my day now where it's an appointment. Basically, they're on my appointment
Mm-hmm.
calendar. And
Well,
I
you
try
said
to
it's
keep
your
that.
office mate, right?
Henry is a very good office mate. Yeah. But it's good. It gets me out of the house. And a lot of times too, I think this is with anything creative. If you let it just percolate for a little while you're doing other things. If you almost let it like an app that's running in the background, you get some clarity on the ideas you already have, but also you get some really good ones that pop out when you're just not trying to force it quite so much anymore.
Oh, I agree. Like even if I just set something aside and come back the next morning with fresh eyes,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, I missed all these things, or I can fix that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Well, one of the things I usually like to try to get to towards the end of our interview is advice for someone who's thinking about working from home for the first time. And if you want to spin it towards the productivity side, since you specialize in that, feel free, or just whatever tips or tricks you think of.
I think look, the biggest ones for me are make it as easy as possible for yourself. Make it comfortable and make it easy. Um, I think as unsexy as this sounds, chairs are a big deal.
I'm with you.
Get a chair that fits your desk, that fits you personally, and that you're going to feel comfortable within. You are going to spend a lot of time in that chair, in that space, and your body will thank you, and your brain will thank you, and your spirit when you walk into the room and you're like, or you're like, oh, I love that chair.
Yep. Yep.
So being comfortable in your space, I think, is one. And I think the second one is just let it ride for a couple of weeks when you first start doing it and get a real sense for what your problems are. Don't try to solve everything all at once. You don't have to. You'll figure out which problems rise to the top that are going to help you do your work better. And then you can solve them a couple at a time or one at a time. But sometimes I think that shift to working from home can be super overwhelming at first. You're just everything's different, from the social aspect to the how do I break away from the work when it's always right there, right next to me.
Yeah.
And last, I would say turn off your phone at certain times, turn off the notifications at a certain time of day. I know some work or some deadlines you might have to break that rule from time to time. I know I have. But when I'm out of town, my phone, all of my work stuff is turned off. And typically after 7 o'clock, I've just had to tell a subcontractor that I work with, he apologized for texting me or emailing me, I forget, at like 9:30 at night. And I said, I appreciate that, but I don't even know where my phone was at that point. I don't keep it with me when I've shifted out of work mode. So know where that boundary is for you and respect it as you would somebody else's.
That's all really good. Thank you. You said make it easier for yourself. I feel like one of the things that people do is they try to make their home office pretty. But I like what you said about it's not sexy, but a chair is really important. I've actually said the same thing. I've said ergonomics aren't sexy, but they make you feel sexy. When you actually have a good chair and you sit correctly, you're more likely to just feel good about everything. So
I agree. I have a weird desk that I built from scraps in my basement.
I have one of those. Well, kind of. Yeah. Keep going.
I built it. It's got some neat little shelves that are in the inside so that when I walk past, I don't see all of my work stuff spilled out all over. But it's a weird height and it doesn't fit most chairs. So that took some doing. For a while, I had the desk boosted up and that works. Now I have a different chair and that works. I also have a stand-up. It's not a stand-up desk, but it's a topper that you put on your desk
riser.
that you can lift it. Yeah. And I love that. I love the back and forth during the day. It just feels completely different to stand for an hour than it did when you were sitting. It's like walking into somebody else's office and hanging out for a while.
Does your husband also work from home?
He does.
So, but not in the same space as you. I'm always curious how that works for people.
Yeah, that took some getting used to because my job before, when I first started working from home, and my job now is very social, which as an introvert, it's like an oddball combination, but all of my work involves usually talking to at least one other person, sometimes 20 other people. And it's loud. And by the time I finish a workshop, I'm usually really amped up and I gotta go talk to someone. And he works as a recording engineer, so largely solo when he's mixing and his work. It's usually one-on-one for his work.
Mhm.
And then he also works in the web development. So he'll spend, a few hours in very focused, very quiet, very intense work. And then I bring my energy into the room and it's
Mhm.
like absolute chaos.
Does he need to try to like block out your talking to be able to do his recording?
He records in a completely different space in the house that was built way before I ever worked from home. So
Okay.
that's great. But he does the web development, he does from inside the house, and he'll work in a comfy chair in the living room, and he's perfectly happy with that. He will say, I don't know how he does this because I could never do this, but he doesn't even hear me talking, he said.
Yeah,
It's
I mean, I
fascinating.
believe it. I worked nights for 13 years, and my husband got to the point where he did not hear my alarm clock going off in the middle of the night. He
Yeah.
hears he hears an alarm if I'm sleeping on the couch for whatever reason. I usually just fall asleep on the couch, but I'll set like the Echo Dot to be my alarm in the middle of the night to wake me up. And he will hear that one from downstairs.
Okay.
I don't know why.
We did come up with a strategy at one point that we're pretty careful just walking into each other's space, even though
Mhm.
that's the living room or my office,
Mhm.
which is just, it doesn't have a door on it or anything. It's just my
Mhm.
space in the house. To ask, is this a good time? When you're going to take a break, I could use 15 minutes with you
Mhm.
for something unrelated to work. So we've learned to be just more cognizant of walking into each other's space because you don't know what the other person's been working on. And
Mhm.
just like straight productivity facts, I mean, to get pulled out of deep work, it can
Right.
take up to like a half an hour, not to just get back into the work, but to get back into it at the same level you were
Right.
yanked out of it,
Oh, I get it.
which is why that task switching is so detrimental to getting things done.
Mhm.
So we've been super, super careful about learning to be respectful of walking into someone else's space, regardless of where it is, and like
Mhm.
just trouncing on them immediately with my needs.
Yeah. My husband has a pretty good signal. He's right in our bedroom and I do walk through and I'm a talker, but we only work from home one day a week at the same time. Um, his signal is if he's in a meeting or if he's listening to training, he has headphones on. So we
Mhm.
know we can't just like walk up and start talking to him if he has headphones on. Maybe he should wear his headphones more often. um, but when the kids were home with us during the pandemic, that was 16 months that we had to kind of learn to not just walk in and talk to him because he did still have to focus.
Yeah.
And his work is different than mine. Mine is, like you said, kind of more social in some ways. Um, where I've had to teach my kids the signal of if they start knocking on my door and they peek in and I put my hand up, it means I love you, but I can't talk to you right now. I can't wait to talk to you soon, but you have to give me a few more minutes. And so now that my youngest is 7.5, that's easier to do than when they were like 1.
Yeah. I had watched something months ago, and I don't remember who it was, but their young daughter had made a traffic light for outside his office, and they just used the lights of the traffic light, and everybody knew exactly what was going on, when it was a hard stop, when it was come on in, and when it was I'm kind of getting ready to do something, so I might not have all the time to give to
That's
you right
awesome.
now.
I just interviewed a guy, Justin James, and he had a similar thing. It was like an on off or stop go kind of thing where it was like a signal that he had a switch that he could control for his wife and kiddo to see. I love it. Maybe I should implement that, like a what do you call it? On the air light, right? Like the old school radio stuff.
We used to have a crocheted, it was only this big monster when I worked for the Appalachian Trail, and there were 3 of them on my desk. And if anybody was having a tough day or they really needed to buckle down and didn't want to be bothered, they would put the monster on their desk. And that way you knew just walking by, like, "Mm-mm, leave them
She's
alone for a
got
little
the
while."
monster.
And if
That's
it was
awesome.
2 monsters, you knew they were having a very bad day and that they could use some help.
So when I was reading your guest interest form, you alluded to a story. I asked if you normally work from home, and you said yes, except for one guy needed to be trained in person. Do you want?
Oh, this was such a fun job. I had done a training seminar remotely for an executive leadership team for a department, a really big company, for this one tiny department. And they were just lovely. They had a really good time, and we talked a lot about email overwhelm and just figuring out that piece of getting your daily calendar under control. And so they brought me back to do a full day of a combination. And it's one of my favorite things to do. It's called the full focus day, where companies can figure out what works for them. So they get me for the whole day, but it can be a combination of training. It can be workshops. It can be one-on-one coaching, which was what this got pulled into. And it turned out most of what I did that day was still remote. But they wanted to make sure that one person was able to get the most out of it. And they were just really concerned that his genuine reluctance to embrace tech would be a deterrent, and that he would just kind of give up on it. And so they brought me down in person so that one session would be live and in person. And we fixed two things for him that just changed his world related to emails and calendars and them talking to each other. And the woman who had organized it, she emailed me a week or so later. She goes, "He's still talking about it. He's just so thrilled." And he didn't think that he was going to be able to get anything out of it if it was remote to remote. And he just can't stop talking about it. So sometimes it's so worth it just to do the little bit of in person that makes it work for someone. I think we've gotten so used to remote that for a lot of us, it's old hat and it just works. But especially when you're really unsure about learning something new, that in-person contact and just the empathy that you can feel coming off of the other person, like, we're going to get through this, just makes all the difference.
Well, I think those of us that work in Zoom and, other web conferencing platforms regularly, it's old hat to us, like you were saying, but there's a pretty big subset of people in the world that still haven't ever used Zoom or similar remote tools. Now that I told you before we recorded that I help host a weekly remote meeting for international children's entertainers from around, it's a really cool thing. But, there's some people that do like very physical things for their job that don't really need to use the tech, and have, still need to learn like the basics of how to enter a Zoom room and how to mute yourself. And like, we've had to go through this a few times. And it's great because once they figure it out, they're great at it. But then I also write resumes for people. And sometimes I've learned that there's some people that like, they don't know how to return a digital document. They'll print things off and handwrite them and then take a picture and text it to me rather than be able to like send me back a Google form or something like that. So there's still a lot of people out there that, depending on, what their past, livelihood has entailed, and they might not know the tech tools that we know.
Yeah. I think just as a general rule, just meeting people where they are and helping them get to where they want to go is just the magic formula.
So was that local to you? Like, or did you have to like fly in to go have your remote meeting with him in person?
I didn't have to fly, but it was a couple hours.
That's so cool. All right. Well, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, well, I shouldn't say no. I should say yes. If the folks are interested in learning about the Start with Better meetings, there's a book and a toolkit that goes with it. A lot of done-for-you resources that you can find on my website, which is findfunctionandflow.com. And if anybody has any questions or follow-ups from that, I'm always love to hear from folks.
We'll put the website into our show notes, and that's the best way to find you is on your website.
It is. Yep.
Findfunctionandflow.com.
You got it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for spending time with me today. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, April. This was so much fun.
I always love a good conversation, and you're a good storyteller too. So it helps.
Thank you.
Before we go, I just want to let my listeners know that I am always looking for people who have interesting stories about working from home or interesting jobs, whatever it is. If you want to talk about it, you can find me at April@yesiworkfromhome.com. That's my email address. Or you can go to www.yesiworkfromhome.com/podcast/guest. And that is my guest interest form where people can let me know a little bit more about what they do and who they serve and how they do it. And that's where I find a lot of my guests. So thank you so much, Kelly, for meeting with me, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, April.
All right. This has been Kelly McGinley and April Malone with Yes, I Work From Home, and we will see you next time.